So I have the back cam on, and hopefully, excuse me one second. That pillow has bothered me a lot when I see it in the background. I'm actually, oh well, I don't mind if you see this. It's a beachy bag, but the other just seems out of place. Anyway. So, as I've been thinking about my life and some of the stories, the interesting and I guess the stories that I'm grateful for and the people that I've known, and I don't know where a lot of these people have ended up. You know, I don't know if some people are on social media or not. May not be their thing. Some of this I know some of you have heard, and some of these stories you haven't heard. But I recall in our first house, I could describe every single home we lived in living color, actually. I don't know the first one in Hearn that my parents lived in, except for what I told you about Mahaley. But the second one, or the first one that I recall living in, on Guaraiuva Street, which was in the borough of Santo Amaro, where the statue that I mentioned, actually that statue is called Borbagato. And the statue, instead of them painting the statue, they used mosaics to color the statue. That's what I was trying to describe. I think a bandeirantes is a little like a pilgrim, as I'm recalling the outfit. There was a hat similar to the pilgrims, but it was a smaller brim, sort of twisted up, not quite a cowboy hat. And then there was there were the pantaloons and the boots, and then a leather, I don't know if it was a jacket or I think it was a vest that was belted with a big white shirt or blouse. I guess it'd be more of a blouse because it was full in the arms, and I don't know about the collar. So I think the pilgrims had that same sort of get up, but that's what I remember about Borbagato. So we lived in this borough, and the polo field was just magical. You know, walking by that, excuse me one second, walking by the polo field, for whatever reason, I recall sitting there was barbed wire at the back, and watching the matches, and I think that's maybe where I fell in love with horses. Going to I remember there was a family named the Sour Milks. I believe they were maybe part German, Saurmilk. They had a daughter about my age named Brenda, and she attended the grade school as well. But we would go over to their house, and Mom and Mrs. Sourmilk would talk, and Brenda and I would play. She was a very good gymnast and taught me cartwheels. Donna Josefina lived across the street, and she and Sir Wilson were kind of like an aunt and uncle, especially after Richard was born. They were very helpful with if Mom needed someone to watch Richard for some reason, and they would watch him. And they had two sons. I think it was Paulo and Cesar. I'm not really sure, but they always treated us like we were their little brother, sister, niece, nephew, whatever. They may have only been 10, 12, 13 years older, but they seemed so much older. And we would go eat at their home quite a bit, as well as they would be in our homes, along with the Shu family next door, as I told you. And there were the people off to the left who raised chickens. The chickens usually woke us up early in the morning when they cackled, and that was where I first saw a chicken plucked. You might have people told you this. So our home had I thought it was very charming. Every home in Brazil, typically in Sao Paulo, we didn't have open lawns. They were gated, or they might have a wrought iron fence of some sort, maybe a stucco wall or a brick, wooden or stone wall of some sort. We had a wrought iron gate where you could actually, it allowed for a car to go in, and it was in a brick pattern, not in a checkerboard pattern. So the squares were maybe roughly that big, and then the next row beneath was staggered, and it was painted beige, wrought iron, and I believe the handle was just a regular some sort of a metal handle with a coating that would tend to peel off once in a while. And it was the same handle that we had on our front door, the back door, the doors inside the house, if I recall. And then there was a small wall. It was about, for a little kid, I don't know if my dimensions are right. It was maybe 3 feet high as the gate. So one side of the gate hinged on the wall that abutted the Shu's house, and then the other hinge was on this wall, and it was a gray granite wall, and it went up about, it was about maybe 4 feet wide and about 18 inches deep. And then from that wall to the other neighbor's wall was a fence made of the same wrought iron with the staggered sort of brick, like, and it had holes in the middle. It was just the shape. It wasn't a solid wrought iron. We also had a red terracotta broken tile mosaic floor driveway, and there was a small front yard with a lawn, and you could go directly to the back to the garage, which was it was about I think it was a little bigger than a single garage, but not quite a double. Maybe it was a single garage. And there was a porte-cochere from the front of the house to about where the door that went into the kitchen started. So that was maybe 20 or so feet long porte-cochere, or a little bigger. And so the front door was, I believe it was metal, and it had a glass inset window. I don't know if it opened up or not, but I know that it was opaque, and it was that kind of glass that was a little bit curved, about every half inch or so. And so if somebody came to the front door, they couldn't look inside, but we could see that somebody might be there, and they shouldn't have been there if our gate was closed, and you could lock that gate if you wanted to. So the living room jutted out further, about, 10, 15 feet further than the outside living room wall. And they both had big windows looking to the outside with the old Venetian blinds that, they didn't have the little sticks like mini blinds, so you had to man them like a sail, and if you didn't do that correctly, they would jumble up and and you'd have to buy a whole new set of blinds. So when I learned how to sail from my father-in-law, I felt like I was, manning the Venetian blinds. So in the living room up against that front window, we had a bench, and it had a big long, it was like a redwood of some sort, the base. And then it had a cushion about this big, and it was maybe 5 feet long. And then at the other end of that bench was a sort of a gray and white marble top, and that's where a TV sat. And the front of it was, I think, gray, and the back half was blue. It had the antennas on top, and so that talked to the antenna on the roof, which was, the kind that had the pole with the four. It looked like 4 stories of whatever zigzag. And just so you know, kids, we had, I think we had Hedgie Global. We had the that was the most popular station, and I don't remember the other one. I don't know why I'm thinking Hedgie Nacional. That would have been Hedgie would have been network, I believe. And then I think they had a public station as well, but I don't recall more than 3 stations. And we saw everything on that, from American, German, Japanese shows dubbed into Portuguese. Sometimes they would be left in their original language with the subtitles, and then Portuguese, Brazilian shows as well. So, excuse me one second. And if there was a lightning storm, typically you couldn't watch TV. The TV also went off the air at midnight, and so there was I recall, and I think they had it in the U.S. as well, there was some sort of an emblem. I think it said "off the air" in Portuguese, the same thing in English. And ours was in black and white until we moved to the U.S. Color TV came to the U.S., I think, in the 60s, late 50s, 60s, but most households began to have them in the 60s. And in Brazil, they came in the late 70s, and so we had black and white TV until 75. But that emblem would come up, and there was always an Indian or native headdress. I think it was the same in the U.S. as well. I don't know if that was just Brazil, or maybe in the U.S. it was the flag, and I think they played the national anthem at midnight when they signed off the air. But in Brazil, they played the Brazilian national anthem, and you had that emblem. I don't know if it was in all 3 stations, but I don't recall staying up till midnight, except for maybe a couple of times. Maybe it was New Year's or something. I don't know. I just remember when I was 6, I went to bed at 6. When I was 7, I went to bed at 7. When I was 8, I went to bed at 8. And when I was 9, I got to go to bed at 9. And I had to keep going to bed at 9 after that. So, but what I loved about that house, it had mid-century modern furnishings in it. Very, very stylish. And the furniture itself was very sleek. The wooden parts were very sleek. They were wide at the top, and then they tapered. The legs tapered at the bottom. And the sofa, I think, sat 3 people comfortably. It's like I don't even know how to pronounce it. Jacquard, J-A-Q-U-A-R-D. So it was kind of a white background with a green florally swirl print, and then the very same thing in yellow for the chair. And the table, which my parents still have the top, it's like a pink and white marble top, but the base broke. Now, I love the base because it was kind of like this at the bottom. So it was 2 pieces of wood that crisscrossed. So it was like this and like this, and then there was another piece of wood just like it, and it was just opposite. So underneath, it looked like 4 little rooms, and so we could play Tonka trucks and Barbies underneath that, and sometimes put a blanket over top to hide the little Barbie house. And the Tonka trucks. We always pretended like the Barbies got in the Matchbox cars and we pull them out. I just had one blonde Barbie and a skipper, so that's what Richard played with. And then there were some knickknacks on the top we couldn't touch. I think there were marble grapes. There was a jacaranda apple, which opened. I think I have that. I don't know where it is. It's packed away. And inside is a cotton bowl with 3 bowls, which my mother gave me after my grandfather's funeral. They laid cotton bowls on top of his casket, and I wasn't able to go, unfortunately. It was sometime around 97, 98, I believe. Anyway, I think he was 91. A very funny man, very Will Rogers-esque. And I don't remember the other knickknacks, but we couldn't touch them. Mom had to come take those off, so. The wares in Brazil were very inexpensive, so it might look like you had money, but you could live fairly inexpensively in Brazil during that time. And typically, a missionary salary could go further down in Brazil than in the U.S. Excuse me one second. I recall a fireplace in the corner which had river rock. It was varnished, and it had I believe it was sort of a pink slate top. And what I loved during Christmas is we played we had a Johnny Mathis Christmas, Ray Conniff Christmas. When I hear those, it still takes me back there. And to the tree that Mother used to put together, which was maybe 2 feet high, and it had the silver branches, and we had the pink glass balls, and we didn't have any other color balls until later. Things started getting added to it slowly. I think we had that the whole 4 homes that we were at in São Paulo. And I thought that green Christmas trees were kind of funny, even though we saw them out in nature, the evergreen trees, because the big deal in the 60s was to have these tinsel trees. So it was unusual to see a green tree, and definitely I don't recall seeing a live tree, but it would have been like a unicorn back then. So that was kind of funny. So the dining room had I think it was cherry wood. Actually, I think that the bench that the TV sat on, which was plastic, and it didn't have a remote control. You had to turn the knobs, and it clicked. And sometimes that knob broke, and you had to use pliers to twist it until we got a new knob or whatever, or eventually a new TV. I think one time the antennas broke, and we rigged it together with tinfoil, and that worked. So kids, the antennas on the TV talk to the antenna on top of the house, which talk to the antenna at the broadcast station. And if the station went out, then forget it. Just, you just hope for the best and turn the radio on if there was any kind of storm. And if there was a thunderstorm, a lightning storm, you had to unplug everything in the house because it wasn't grounded. And I hated unplugging things because for some reason it sparked with me a lot. I don't know what that says about my vibration quality. I'm a very sparkly person. But our table was cherry wood. It was round, and I think it had a leaf or two, and again the legs tapered, and it had a matching buffet where we stored all of the china, which I don't recall if Mom got that, if they got that for their wedding or they bought it. I think they bought it in Brazil. They still have it. It's white with a silver rim, and there are, I think, pink roses right in the middle, just very faint, 2 or 3 little roses, I believe, in the middle. So And the silver has maintained its quality because Mom never put it in the dishwasher. And we never had a dishwasher in Brazil until we moved to the U.S. And we didn't have a telephone. So that was something, if you wanted to use a telephone to call, it was pretty expensive, but you paid a neighbor or friend. And I recall our friends at Benices, I think the Nortons may have had a telephone. I do know that some neighbors, I think the Shoes maybe had one in our first home. And then the second home was Ribeiro do Vale. It was about 11 blocks from this particular, the first home. And so I'll go back to the first home. One of the commonalities in all of the kitchens in Brazil, I noticed, was there would be these 3 to 4 pane windows at the top. They were wide, maybe 2, 3, 4 feet long, depending on the how big the wall was, and maybe 8 inches high each pane. Typically opaque, or maybe that glass. They would all be different kinds of glass, and maybe some people had clear glass. But typically there were 3 or 4 of those windows, and then there was a handle, a metal handle that you pushed down, and each of those panes went out like this, and it allowed fresh air into the kitchen, and it sat near the top of just below the ceiling. It was very, very high up. It was there more to let light in and fresh air, because the wall space was usually used for cabinets or shelves, but there might be a window. Anyway, I believe our and the kitchen cabinets were marble, white marble, very cold, always very cold. And I believe we had those in all 4 houses, and they had a lip at the edge, so if you spilled water, and there was like an undermount, the sinks, I believe, were undermounted, so the water could drip into the sink, and if water spilled on the edge of the countertop, it could dribble into the sink. And the handles were just the regular twisty handles, old-fashioned, with a cold and a hot, or in Brazil would be the F for frio, which is cold, and then the Q for quente, which is hot, or it'd be red for hot or blue for cold. Typically, there weren't double sinks. There was one big sink. And then the old-fashioned refrigerators, typically that opened with a, sometimes you'd pull, the handle would come out and the door would open, but ours, that might have been our first refrigerator, but I remember we eventually had one where you pulled it out like this, and it had the freezer on top and everything on the bottom, and it seemed really big, until we came to the U.S. and got a U.S. refrigerator, and those were a lot bigger. But of course, for a little kid, everything looks big. I'm sure everything would look miniature. It's funny when I go back and see places, even here in Boston, when I was the same height and even about a half inch taller, some of the places look smaller, which is funny. I can't figure that one out. So, anyway. The tile, I think, was white tile with little black inlays in. Then the kitchen table had wrought iron legs. They were black wrought iron with looked like little supports, silver supports, buttresses, that went from the leg to the bottom of the table, kind of at an angle on each side of the leg. It was decorative and supportive as well. Now the legs didn't fold. They might have looked like they did. And I believe ours had a formica top. It was about this thick, and it had formica all around. And it had a marbly kind of look, maybe pink, gray, black, white. recall that the nice silverware was kept in a cherry wood box with, the little velvet cover. And it had to be polished once in a while. And then we had the same silverware the whole time we were in Brazil, and even after we moved to the States, and my parents got some new silverware at some point. But I recall it was square, kind of tapered out. It had a little floral design at the end, and then it was, kind of from the floral design to the edge of the taper was just flat, and then it was flat from the other side all the way to the fork, spoon, or knife portion. So it was a real cute little flower, a little square. And then the silverware was just your traditional sort of curvy, beautiful, which my parents don't have anymore. We also, in the dining room, I believe that's where we kept no, I'm sorry. This was in the living room. This was against the fireplace, was the hi-fi, which was the record player. And you could open the top, and there was an arm that held the top open, and you could play 33s, which were the large records with a tiny hole, or 45s, and that meant it went spinning at 33 rotations per minute, or 45s were 45 rotations per minute. And they had a tiny hole or a larger one, which you could buy a little piece that fit in the middle that had a tiny hole that I'm missing something here. I knew I was missing something. Let's just turn this. Hang on a second. I'm going to end this portion right here so that I can find the right music, because I knew there was something missing, and this is a little long. So let me finish with this. The story about this house. So about the records, you could buy a piece that went on that. I think it was a sprocket where you put the records on, and so then you could put your 45s and stack them on. I think we could stack 5 records, and there was an arm, and so when one record was finished, you put the needle on, and when it got to the middle and it went out, then it was the cue to let the next record drop. And of course, if you scratched your records, you could fix it typically with pantyhose. So you take a pair of pantyhose and wipe it around if it was a light scratch. Otherwise, you'd have to go buy a new record. And if the needle was broken or worn, it would scratch the record. So you'd have to go buy a new needle, and you had to have a special touch to put that needle on the arm. Otherwise, if you didn't put it in just right, then you would have some trouble with, your record playing abilities. And so we stored the records underneath the hi-fi, and then on either side were they're the tweeters. There were 2 tweeters and a subwoofer on each side. So the bass was a subwoofer, and then the higher pitched would come through the tweeters. For those who don't know high fidelity, or now everything's separate, or they're in smaller components, and it was behind a cloth, kind of hid that, and then the rest was this beautiful, I don't know what kind of wood, it might have been cherry wood as well. So that's what I remember about our first house. And it had a long hallway, bedroom to the left, which eventually became mine, another bedroom, which was my first bedroom, became Richard's. My parents' was at the end, and then the bathroom was to the right with an atrium in between the bathroom and the kitchenette. And then Mom put a big, she said it was her only piece of artistic thing that she ever did, but it was like a big a frame with, what would you call it, like wire, a tiny wire, and then she cut plastic fruit in half and put a fishing net and fake plastic fish and starfish, whatnot, and sand dollars all over. It was really, really neat. So that's it. I'm going to go ahead and end right here. So thank you for taking a trip down Guaraiuva Lane with me, and I'll tell you a little bit of our other houses and some stories that went along with us as well. So take care. Bye-bye.